So, in the last class, we were looking at this Lamarckism and Darwinism and what were the different like limitations of those theories. And then we also had a briefly looked at what Neo-Darwinism is and what does it believe in terms of these 5 parameters. And like I said, we'll look at these parameters over these next few slides individually based on one point by point. So the we had also mentioned of this mutation theory, which was De Vries theory, like also known as De Vries theory of mutation. So this theory was proposed as a part of evolution in 1901, and this was done by this Hugo De Vries. So now, according to these theories, the new species they arise from the pre-existing species in a single generation by the sudden appearance of distinct and discontinuous heritable changes. Now, this distinct and discontinuous heritable changes, they were called as mutations later. And these kind of mutations, they were the one, according to this theory, they were the ones which were responsible for the creation of new species from the pre-existing. So that was the theory which was proposed by De Vries. Now, Darwin had called these like mutations in his theory as spores, or even the other guy, Peterson, who was studying genetics, he called them saltations or saltatory variations, which ultimately saltatory means discontinuous. So that way he called it as discontinuous variations. So there were just different names to these mutations earlier, but this mutation name was given by this De Vries fellow. So what were the postulates in this theory? First one, like we know most of these mutations are sudden, they are large and distinct, discontinuous heritable changes. That means they can happen any time point. That is why sudden. Large, that means at one time point it can affect many individuals within a species or even across the different species. Distinct, that means it can be specific. Discontinuous heritable changes, because it may or may not be like transferred across every generation. That's why discontinuous. So all the organisms, they have inherent tendency to change or mutate, and this is related to the environmental factors or the factors around which we live with. Because of that, every organism will have certain mutation happening within them. So that is the inherent tendency. Third point, different mutations may appear in different members of the same population of a species. Like let's say we are talking of one particular population of human being, let's say one city, one village or so on, and all of them need not have the same mutation. They might have different mutation based on what they are exposed to, whether within the same population or even across different species. And equally, there is a chance that the mutation, like randomly, it can be a chance, rather, I should say, that it can be same mutation, but that is like a rare chance. But the mutation which occurs within the individuals of some population, these will be different. Mutations, they are indeterminate, and that means they cannot be assigned pre-hand. That beforehand we cannot assign them. These are random changes. That's why they are indeterminate, and they can be harmful or useful. That we know already. Like some mutations, they after changing, they can be useful, or some may not be useful, or they can be harmful. Mutations, they are subjected to natural selection. Now, this is one of the very interesting points from this theory. The moment they are subjected to natural selection, the useful mutations, they will always be favored, and the harmful mutations, they will be eliminated by the death of the mutant. So that is what the mutation theory speaks of. Then the next point in that postulates is the mutation may appear again and again, generation after generation. That means because it is discontinuous, the same kind of mutation which has happened earlier may reappear again in different generation, and thus they provide more and more chance of natural selection. Now, if it is harmful mutation, obviously, according to this theory, that organism or that population with those harmful mutation may not survive. But if the mutation is useful and if it is reoccurring every now and then after few generations, there is that will be favored by the nature, and through the process of natural selection, that species will prosper. So that is what this first point on this slide says. Then evolution by mutation is a discontinuous process. Not necessarily every species that is getting evolved is undergoing the mutation, right? And that is when it is said that evolution by mutation is a discontinuous process. It need not happen in every generation. So that is why discontinuous, which was the first point as well. It's discontinuous heritable changes. And the last point, mutation theory can explain the occurrence of vestigial organs or even the over specialized organs. So earlier theories of, let's say, Darwinism or Lamarckism, which failed to explain these vestigial organs or over specialized organs, like we can give that thought to the mutation theory, saying that due to the mutation, vestigial organs can be developed in certain species, and that might become heritable change, or it can also be over specialized organ due to the mutation. So these things can occur. And now these were the postulates, or these were the hypotheses which were put forward by this De Vries fellow. Now there were certain objections or limitations to this mutations theory. So, and these were proposed by these three guys, Davis, Gates, and Morgan. And this Morgan is the same which we had studied earlier. So these guys, they mentioned that mutation theory cannot explain the phenomena of mimicry. If I don't know if you have heard of this phenomena earlier, it's a very interesting process within the evolution, which is called as mimic and model. So just to give you a brief idea of this phenomena of mimicry, let's say a particular species is there, which is called as model, and they are kind of harmful, or they are creating overpopulation. So there will be some other species which will be generated throughout the process of evolution, which we call as mimic. And because of this, there will be some predators of the model. Model was the original species, and due to these predators and mimic, altogether the population will look like it is increasing. So the predator will prosper, and that predator will feed more onto the model, not on the mimic, because mimic in number will be always less, model will be always high. So together, mimic plus model, the number will remain high, and that way the predators will feed onto the model. So that way the overpopulation can be controlled. So that is what is known as phenomena of mimicry. So on Wikipedia page, actually you can read a lot about this. It's a very interesting description. So that is that phenomena of mimicry was not explained by this mutation theory.
Sir.
Yes.
So could you repeat that once? I didn't understand the phenomena of mimicry, like the model and the mimic.
Let's say there is model is the original species, which is either harmful or it is having quite a lot of population, overpopulated, right? So what nature does over the time is it will create a species which is similar to model, which we call as mimic, right? It is a kind of imitation or kind of copy of model, right? Now, together, if you look at these two, mimic plus model, the number will be even more higher, right? And model are the organisms on, these are the prey for some predators, right? So if the total number is looking higher, the predators will also prosper, and they have specific feeding ability on the model and not on the mimic, because this is a natural process. Means that's what the phenomena says. It may or may not happen in always, in every case, but that's what the model speaks of, the phenomena of mimicry. So when the predator will feed mainly on the model, their number will go down, and mimic is anyway less in number compared to the model, so they will not be creating any harm. But the model was harmful because of this creation of the mimic. Their numbers looks like it is increased. So predators will prosper. Predators will feed on the model organism, and their numbers will go down. So the situation is kind of pacified. So that's what is the phenomena of mimicry.
So, but that's only if the model. So, like the model is very large in number at first, and a mimic comes, but the prey doesn't eat the mimic, right? Like the predator doesn't eat the mimic. So, like it doesn't make sense. Why would suddenly the model population, like why would the predators become more when the mimic arrives? Because, like, okay, the mimic might look like the model, but if the predators don't eat on the mimic, then their populations won't rise, right? It will remain the same.
No, but then predators are prospering, no?
Yeah, but like even without the mimic, if the mimic was eliminated, it would be the same situation.
That's what I'm saying. When something looks that there is quite a lot, it's a simple thing. You will find more animals or cattle wherever there is more grass. It's that's the simple logic.
Yes, so but because there's more grass to eat, and predators don't eat mimics, right? So their populations will relatively stay the same.
So now in such case, let's say there is something that looks like a grass. Now I am giving a hypothetical example. That's something that looks like a grass, but the cattle cannot feed on that. That's mimic. So they will obviously assume for them, for the model, mimic is increasing.
Yes, sir. But once it finds out that it's not able to feed, so it'll be the same. It's not like there's lots of grass. So you know, like if there's lots of edible grass, then the cattle will be more. But if the edible grass is not there, if there's just grass, or if there's half, or there's some proportion, but like it might be fooled once or twice, but once it finds out that it's not able to eat it, it'll be the same thing, right?
That's exactly what the theory says. After a certain point, that population will go down, because it's a kind of like food chain like thing, right?
Whose population?
Sorry?
So whose population will go down? The predator?
No, the model, which was kind of overpopulated or harmful.
So like, okay, let's just say we are the model. So like there's no mimic, right? I mean,
yeah, there is no mimic. I guess no, I don't know. See, this whole concept is applicable only to specific species. So that's when I said, if you read through that Wikipedia page, it gives 2-3 examples. One is of the moth, and the other one, I guess, which one was it? I forgot. Some other example. They explain it very specifically. So maybe if you go over it, you will understand it.
Okay, but again, it's very specific.
It's not like a general phenomena that happens in every species also. Because this phenomena would have been observed, that's what this model would have come out. So that is the and this particular part is like not in detail to you. It just mention of this, that what is this mimicry phenomena. Okay, so I guess we will move ahead from there. So that's what I was pointing, that the mutation theory is not able to explain this, why does this happen in terms of phenomena of mimicry. Plus the protective coloration. Protective coloration in the sense of like what you know as camouflage. That was not being explained by the mutation theory, which was very specific. and also the relationship between the position of nectaries in the flowers with respect to the length of proboscis, that is the mouth part of the insect that pollinate these flowers. So both of them, they co-evolved over the time. So why this co-evolution happened, that was also not explained by mutation theory. So uh, these 3 points specifically, phenomena of mimicry, protective coloration, and the co-evolution phenomena was not properly explained by this mutation theory. Also,
So, like,
yes,
I had a question. Like, what's like for the mimic? What's the advantage in doing this?
mimic does not have any advantage.
Okay, so it's just to reduce the population of the model.
Yeah,
So nature kind of uses one species to do this.
correct.
Okay.
So does the mimic evolve from the model, or is it a different species that is changing to become like the model?
It's different species as far as I understood, which looks like a butterfly and moth, something like that.
So if
No,
there
but
are too many moths, then the butterflies will change slightly, and a few butterflies will start looking like the moths.
but butterflies evolved from moths, right?
Yeah, but that's what the model speaks of. The species can be similar. That's what is that mimic part coming from.
So, but the butterflies didn't evolve from moths so that the moth population could go down, right? It
No,
was
just giving an example of mimic. I'm not giving you example of that phenomena of mimicry.
so, but like this doesn't seem very like possible, right? I mean, there's one species with a large population. Why would another species like become like that species? Like, why would this even happen?
That's what I said. No, it's like a food chain. If let's say that now there in case of food chain, if we talk, there is no mimicry as such, or there is no similar organism growing. But let's say, okay, let me just show you that page because I myself need some clarification in there. I just read through it. What was it? Mimicry, mimic and model.
So like the mimic is there, and if it's similar to the like if it looks similar to the model, then like it its physical features or and functions can't be that different. Otherwise, it won't look similar. Like a monkey and a human will look similar, but like because of their appearance, their physical abilities will also be similar. Like a whale and a human will never look similar, right?
Yeah.
So like the predator might feed on the mimic also then, like unknowingly.
See, where is that written? Here, if you read this paragraph, no, is that one or this one? This paragraph, the highlighted one. So the imitation species is called the mimic, while the imitated species that is protected by its toxicity, foul waste or whatsoever is the model, that is the original species. Now the predatory species mediating the indirect interaction between mimic and model is known as the signal or operator or whatsoever. We don't have to go into those technical details, but you can read this here. By parasitizing the honest warrior signal of the model, that is this operator thing, which is known as the relationship. The Batesian mimic, this is the name of the scientist, gains an advantage without having to go at the expense of arming itself as in protecting itself. The model, on the other hand, is disadvantaged along with the dupe. Dupe is again that operator or signal what we are talking about, the predatory species, right? If the imposters again, those who harm, appear in high numbers, positive experiences with the mimic may result in model being treated as harmless. And this is specifically talking of if the imposters appear in high number, there the model can be treated as harmless. But at higher frequency, there is also a stronger selective advantage for the predator to distinguish the mimic and the model. So that is what the model proposes. This phenomena of mimicry. This is what it says. Like at different conditions, depending on what is the number of model and how harmful it is, the number of mimic will change. So that is what is selective advantage. And for these reasons, mimics, they are usually less numerous than the models. Now, an instance of no frequency, no, that we can skip. Some mimetic populations have evolved multiple forms. Mimetic population, that means the one which is trying to imitate the original, enabling them to mimic several different models and thereby to gain greater protection. And that is what is this Batesian mimicry. And it also says, read this line here, it's not always perfect. So again, if we go into detail, there will be quite a lot to understand here. But
I got it. Like I got it. It explained quite well.
So that is what is that mimicry part. But again, we don't have to go into too much of technical details of it. That's when I said, if at all you find it interesting. Actually, when there is quite a lot of interesting facts around this phenomena of mimicry, like considering the genetic perspective, evolution perspective, and so on. But yeah, let's not waste too much time on that. Okay, so this first point, which said mutation theory cannot explain this phenomena of mimicry, the protective coloration and the co-evolution aspect with respect to the proboscis as well as the development of the nectaries.
Sir, but why can't mutation theory not explain mimicry? Because, sir, like you can't drastically change your look, right? If you are a human, you can't look like a poisonous frog. But if you're like a non-poisonous moth, then you might be able to change your color a bit and look like a poisonous moth, right? So, like, let's just say there are like 5 different mutations. Like mutations, according to this theory, happen, right? Like in every species, like between every 2 generations is there. And
it may happen.
Yes, sir. And let's just say there are like 2. One which makes you look a bit more like the poisonous one, and one which doesn't. So the one which doesn't will die, and the one which makes you look a bit like the poisonous one will sustain. So in this general trend, if you keep going, at some point, like it won't happen in one generation, but at some point, because of the you look up, like after every generation, you look like a bit more like the poisonous one, and then you'll end up becoming a mimic.
Means, yeah, in a way, yes. But then this phenomena of mimicry, it is like why these 2 species, they have to be there, mimic and model, right? That part, which is equally a part of evolution, that was not explained. Mutation creating species is explained.
So I mean, if one species, the model, it has an advantage, an evolutionary advantage, like they said, being poisonous, so nobody can really eat you. So you don't have a predator that way because you're poisonous. So like it doesn't have to be consciously, right? Like subconsciously, that there's so many mutations, like there's so many species, there's so many possibilities of mutations, and like mutations can happen that randomly make you look a bit similar. So it's random. The phenomena of mimicry, it's random, but it can happen.
Correct.
So like,
is it because of the mutation? That is not established. No, it will happen at random, but is it due to mutation?
So that's the theory, right? So mutation theory can say, it's a theory, so it can say that because of mutation or whatever the terms used in the theory, this happens, and this explains mimicry, right? I mean, it can explain that way, unless we know better.
Yeah, but but maybe I would assume at this point that this De Vries fellow might not have thought of these things, or he might not even have come across this phenomena of mimicry, which people have identified later and said, okay, this model or this mutation theory does not apply to this phenomena of mimicry. That could quite have been a possibility. That I am not sure. It could be just a random example that came across two people, these three people, later after the theory was proposed. But yeah, anyway, so we'll stop with that discussion there. The second point which talks of is the most mutations are harmful or lethal, whereas the evolution is based on the usefulness of the mutant character, right? And like, so that was one of the point that was like said, that if the most mutations are harmful or lethal, and the evolution, whole of the evolution is based on the usefulness of the mutant character, then what is the use of having this both, or even including the neutral one? What is the role of all these three at one, within one organism? That was not clearly explained. It only explained harmful mutations will lead to the that species will or those individuals will not survive. It is lethal mutation. Or if it is useful by the process of natural selection, that species will go ahead in the evolution. But neutral, nothing was said in terms of why these three has to be together at time, at different or rather at different time points within the same individuals. That part again was not explained. And also, if you remember that Morgan study, was specifically talking of that variation and then different individuals being created by those various process of chromosomal mutations and so on. So that's when these points they appear true, that some mutations, they are just neutral, they don't have any effect, and that part was not explained again.
So, but that time chromosomes weren't discovered, right? And they didn't know about genes and DNA also. So how did this guy like make this theory?
Well, that I don't know. But one thing that maybe I guess I haven't mentioned it, which will come here. No, where is it? Where are we now? Okay, let me just think of a moment. It comes. Oh yeah, here it is. This. So that I forgot to mention at the start of this theory. This Inothera lamarckiana. This is one species of a primrose, a flowering plant, primrose. And while wherever he was staying, the place I forgot. So he observed the species of this particular plant, and he identified quite a few different varieties within them. As those he had labeled as different, what we call as species. And in your textbook, there are the 7 species given, which is called as Inothera gigas, Inothera rubrinervis, and so on, oblonga, and there are 7 of them which have been mentioned with different characteristics. So after observing that particular plant, that's when he came to these different conclusions. And of course, then he studied a little bit about other species. That's when he came to these different postulates of the mutation theory. So that was the basis of the theory. But that again does not include a lot of sampling, neither a lot of species and so on. So that's when this theory might not be able to explain each and everything that happens in the nature. So that is the point.
Oh, sir, the last point.
Which this one?
Yeah. Like, why is it wrong?
It's not wrong. The theory is not able to explain it. What is the harmful mutation or useful mutation or the neutral mutation, and how are they helping in the process of evolution at the same time. Individually, they have mentioned it.
So, but like even if you see, like if you get one harmful and one neutral, like then like if you get one good one and one harmful, then it just depends on the surroundings, right? So if you get a very good one and a less harmful one, then you might survive. But if someone gets like that way,
Correct. But then in nature, this is also equally true that most of the mutations, they are harmful, right? And the amount, you imagine, no? Like we have thousands of genes, and within those thousands of genes, if the mutation is happening, what is the chance that you think it will be a helpful or useful mutation? It's
pretty
quite
less.
pretty less, right? Now,
Unless there are many individuals in the species. If it's like that, then if you see, it's quite high.
yeah, correct. But then even then, those individuals will also have mutations which are more harmful. And then if we think whether individually or considering the whole species population, in general, most mutations, they are harmful.
And so they'll be eliminated.
Exactly.
And since it grows in a like we said, it grows in a geometrical thing, progression. The average population of the species, it won't like drastically fall if all the bad mutants are eliminated, because the good mutants will reproduce geometrically.
Yeah, but then that proportion is very less compared to the harmful one. So harmful will go down faster compared to the useful one going higher in number.
So, but it's geometrical, right?
Yeah.
So it's not linear. So in geometrical,
that's when even in that useful mutation thing, there will be further mutations, right? Not necessarily they will stay. That particular mutation might stay, but then another harmful mutation might be developed in those particular species over the time.
Yes, sir. But similarly, like the one that have bad mutation, they won't suddenly all die out. They'll die out over a very long span.
Correct.
So they can still the ones that have bad mutations can also develop good mutation through time, like through that long span.
But that chance is very rare. That's what we are saying.
So, but again, the population is big now.
Correct. But then within the whole population or individually, the chance of having useful mutation is very rare. And that's where the theory fails to explain that particular component.
So the contradiction to this theory is that there are more rare, useful mutations are very common.
Less common.
No, that's what we are saying. And the theory says they are very rare. And that's why it's wrong. So that's the contradiction.
No, theory is talking that mutation is responsible for evolution, right? That species is evolving.
So does the theory say something like useful mutations are less or harmful mutations are more?
Theory, yes. Theory says that. Okay. So yeah. The crux of whole of this thing is theory says mutations, they are causing evolution of a species. But the contradiction statement to that is the mutations, they are always, or rather most of the mutations, they are harmful. So how can we say because of that the species is evolving? And that's not the only parameter, right? So,
but that's like, if you see only the mutations part, not the entire theory, only one part about us having more like harmful, like we do have more harmful mutations than useful mutations, right? But we still evolve. Like in the end, like we said, it's the different factors.
It is not because of the mutation we are evolving. We are evolving, that's right. It's not only mutation because of which we are evolving.
So by mutation, we mean changes in the genes, right?
Yes.
So, but didn't we say earlier that there are different factors which contribute to the change in the genes, and because of the change in the genes, we evolve.
But then the primary reason is not mutation. Primary reason is something else because of which mutation has happened.
No, sir. The primary reason becomes the change in genes. So
Primary reason of evolution becomes, or rather the change in the species becomes the mutation. But the original reason still remains something else. It can be environmental factors or adaptive.
Yes, yes sir. But it's like, what's causing evolution? That's the question. Now, you can't go 3-4 steps back, right? I mean, like there's a glass. So if I tip over the glass,
that is exactly what the theory says. No, they are talking of mutation is the responsible factor for the evolution, which is not for all the cases. And the simplest example that was explained in this co-evolution part as well, right? Certain characters are being developed in a particular species. That is very good evolution part. But then why? That was not clear, which is still a useful, what we say, mutation.
So, but useful mutations can happen, right? I mean, they do happen.
They can happen.
So, I mean, that's what happened.
Correct. But then that chance is very rare.
Well, if they do, like according to the theory, like he didn't really know about chromosomes and all that, right? Like radioactive things in the blood, like potassium 40 or all that. So if he sees that there are a lot of useful mutations, there are a lot of harmful mutations, then he can as well say that, like, you don't have to stress that it's rare, right? I mean, he can just say that, okay, both happen. And this is the result of both happening.
No, I don't know, like how can we ignore that part, because that is like ignoring the sense. Even if we don't mention it, it's still one of the, like, let's say if we talk in terms of percentage, I would say 99% will be harmful than 1% being useful.
No, like why would he in fact say that, like, isn't he kind of contradicting himself? Like, okay, he can observe that there are a lot of useful mutations. So why would he say that no, useful mutations are very rare? And you know, in a species, if you go through the timeline, the species will die out because harmful mutations will be more.
He is not saying that. These three guys are saying that.
But then they're wrong, right?
No, why it is wrong? It's correct, no?
No, I mean, his theory itself, why would he put it in his theory to say that harmful mutations are much, much, much more than useful mutations?
He hasn't put that into theory. He had just mentioned mutations, they are indeterminate, they can be harmful, they can be useful, and or neutral.
Okay, so he hasn't said that.
He hasn't said it. It's these guys saying.
He hasn't said the distribution. So
he hasn't said of that. And these.
So, then what's the problem, sir?
These guys have studied more genetics than Devries, most likely, and that's
yes.
saying that most mutations are harmful or lethal. And
okay.
Useful mutations, they are very less. And why that is not being mentioned, then how does it become the cause for complete evolution?
Okay, so these guys are saying if this mutation theory is correct, then most organisms should have died out.
They are not concluding to the end. They are just asking a question that, is this theory explaining this particular question? Yes or no, that's it. They are not concluding anything.
Well,
if suppose a theory and I am questioning your theory, that's it.
But they are giving a point in the theory that says most mutations are harmful. But if we remove that point, then it makes sense.
No, but that is true. We know this very well.
Yeah, of course. Like if we see modern genetics,
yeah,
and we know this.
Correct.
But I mean, if we know modern genetics, then we know that in the end, evolution is a direct cause of mutation. I mean, if external factors are there, and
that is again, it's a contradictory statement in the sense that mutation alone is not the factor. You have to think of other factors when we speak of evolution. So that is the whole point.
So
it's
like
not just mutation.
Like a small example, if there's a glass and I tip over the glass, I hit the hand. I hit it with my hand. So what's the reason that the glass fell? It's because I hit it with my hand. Now you can say, no, the glass in my hand was on the table because of gravity. So gravity is the reason that it fell. Or you can say, no, it's because both the glass and my hand have mass. It's because of that the glass fell. Right? I mean, so it doesn't make sense. I mean, the primary reason has to be the reason that causes the event to happen. And the secondary reasons can be the reasons that cause the primary reason to happen.
But that is exactly the point. No, you are trying to find out the cause. Here, the cause is very clear. The mutations are happening because of something. So you cannot directly start from the second stage and say, okay, this is the main factor or only factor which speaks or because of which the evolution is happening. And which I totally agree with.
So, but we can't have any more factors. It's like, if let's just say there's a big change in the environment, but there's no mutation. So will evolution happen? It's like a control. It won't happen. But if there's no change in the environment, but there is a change in the genes, will evolution happen? Like, or will a change in the organism happen? It will.
See, again, going back to the same fact, due to certain adaptation situations, mutations are happening. Because of the mutation, species is evolving. So you cannot remove that first part, which is more than mutation. And if you compare the adaptation aspect of the living things compared to the number of useful mutations which are leading to evolution, obviously the first factor is much more stronger than the mutation part. Hereditary.
No, but in the end, they are the same factors, right? I mean,
no, Pratham. How can you even say that?
So, I mean, in the end, okay, like this theory of like mutation, if we like kind of tweak it a bit according to like modern like our theories, so we can say that this is the primary cause for an organism to change, right? And like we can add on to this theory by saying that, okay, we can give extra detail by saying that these factors cause mutation. Maybe gamma rays, like there can be infinite factors that cause mutations, right? It doesn't have to be environment. It can be infinite factors that cause mutations. I mean, changing in the structure of something. It can be any number, right? So we can say that these are the factors that cause this factor to happen. I mean, he gave a step, so like he gave one step back, but these not two steps back. 2 steps back, I mean, the factors that are there, like natural selection and.
Correct, but still that point does not justify it. The question which is raised by these three guys, that will still not be justified by that theory. And that is what I'm also trying to say.
Okay, like we can go forward. We've wasted a lot of time.
Yeah, so, okay, we'll just probably have to finish this part today. Okay, let me just. So, the another objection or limitation, that what is known as the rate of mutation is very slow, right? Very slow in terms of 1 per million or several million gene loci that we know of. There are quite a few gene locations. Out of that, that is one mutation that happens. Now, how the mutation can help in evolution at such a slow space? Again, if you look at the time frame, you would again you might want to say that, okay, it's of course millions of years, but again, this is 1 per million gene loci in one point in one species, right? And out of those, there are most of them which are harmful mutations and not the useful ones, or it can be, if that is first hit and it's useful, it's bingo. But if it is not, it still does not explain this whole concept of evolution. If it is happening at such a slow rate, how like these many different number of species they have evolved over such a short span of time, short span compared to the uh, rate of mutation, right?
So, but isn't that a lot?
No,
When did we evolve from monkeys? Like, how many million years ago?
but how many species are there? Millions of species are there.
Yes, sir. So, let's say we evolved 50 million years ago,
Correct.
right? And let's say one gene changes per million. So that's 50 times the whole genome change. Still, we have very big similarity, like 80% or something. The genome is similar of us and of the monkeys, or something like that. There's a big chunk of similarity.
Yes, but again, having gene similarity does not mean the organisms are similar. We have conserved genes. That does not mean we have similar properties. Function-wise, we have certain similarity for sure. But if you look at the organisms, they are drastically different.
Yes, sir. So if you look at our ancestors and if you look at us, and let's say 40 million years ago, and one gene changed per million for let's say 40 million years. So one gene changed per million for 40 million years. That means, sir, like everything will change, right?
Again, the assumption there is one mutation does not lead to the change in the species, right? It has to be several mutations within that particular species, which is leading to a particular new species or evolved species, right? Now, to let that happen, and all of them, those which are leading to that evolved species, has to be useful. Now, to have that particular chance, you need to have, I don't know how many million of mutations, and that too, we need to have certain useful mutations, which
So,
will.
But it will be useful. So see, there are like millions of individuals in the same on the same planet.
So that is another point which we'll see. Which we'll see in the next part. It is not the individual genetic map which changes. It is the population genetic map which has to change in terms of mutation.
Yes, sir. But all the while, 40 million years, there'll also be natural selection, right?
Correct.
So the useful ones will, in the end, dominate the picture.
You are thinking of one species. Think of millions of species. Do you think same process would have happened in all these species, which is again a rare chance? So if the rate of mutation is so slow, how fast, again, comparatively, how this evolution in these species had occurred?
So let's just assume that actually it's very slow and what they're saying is correct. Like in the end, all the factors that we know contribute to gene change, and that's how evolution happens. So if the gene change is this much, in the end, we can still question with our modern theories how the rate of mutation is so slow. Because like, okay, we have evolved our theories and now we know different factors, but in the end, all the different factors cause the gene change.
Theory is not talking of different factors. Theory is only talking of the mutations. Different factors, they are apart that we know of.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So I'm talking about us. So we know of different factors, and let's just say we say, okay, there's a gene change. There's this much gene change. So us, in the end, all the factors will contribute to gene change if the next generation has to get the genes. So let's just say there are 1 per million. Like after all the factors considered, the change in the genes, if this fact is correct, is still 1 per million. So you can still say that, okay, in the end, the thing that contributes is the one, like there's still 1 per million change. And that's all that's going to change the organism. I mean, the different factors, they played their part, they contributed to the change, but the change is still the same, right? It's 1 per million.
But again, if you talk of this 1 per million, you are assuming that your mutation is useful. I'm talking there has to be millions of such mutations which are 1 per million, and out of these certain will be useful, most of them will be harmful, right? Out of that, the chance of having that particular species changing, it has to accumulate those useful mutations over the time.
So like I'm saying, this same situation applies to modern genetics. So like like currently also, then if we can't justify the statement, like then even like right now we can't justify the statement. So
correct. That's when we never say mutation is responsible for evolution. Mutation is one of the factor responsible for evolution, and then it justifies. And then there are additional factors which causes lot of changes in the individuals, which is mostly the environmental factors, which we call in the context of.
so, but that's again mutation, right? So if you see it in
Pratham,
if
that
you
is,
see it, yeah.
when we say only mutation and the factors with mutation, there is a drastic difference between these.
So, but he didn't mention any factors, right? So he took the complete set. So he took the complete set, right? So if the set is the change in the genome, and there are different subsets, right? Environmental factors, maybe radiation, and there are different subsets. So he was talking about mutation. So if we see what he says at face value, then it's the entire change in the genome. That's what he meant, right? Because that's what mutation is. So that way, if we take the whole thing at face value, he didn't know the subsets. He only knew the entire set. We also know the subset, but in the end, they make up the entire set.
Yeah, in a way, yes, but still.
So we can't say that we can't say that mutation is a it's a part, and the other factor that kind of makes the gene change more is the environmental factor, because that's again mutation, which he said.
No, you are jumping to the second step at the first. There will still be quite a lot of changes that will be required for a particular mutation to happen, right? That mutation is because of the environmental factors, which you clearly cannot discard.
Yes, sir. We aren't discarding.
So
I'm saying that what he did was, so we can individually summarize. So let's just say our total mutation is 100. So we can say, okay, 20 is because of environmental factors, another 20 is because of something else. But he just took the 100 at face value because he didn't know the factors, but he knew the correct figure. Because in the end, the final result is what matters, right? There's a change in the genome.
Right, that is true. Now, even in the same example that you mentioned, right? That's what I said. In one particular individual having those 20 mutations, which may or may not be useful, or having 100 mutations, which may or may not be useful, that will not lead to the change in these species as evolution. What will lead to the change in these species is over the generations, similar changes are happening, which are leading to that accumulation of mutation. And in one generation, it might be having a particular mutation which is useful, but next generation of that species might undergo mutation which is taking them to lethality, right? So considering all of these factors that we know, the rate of mutation is very slow. And that's when this question is coming, how a mutation or mutations can help in evolution at such a slow pace.
So then right now also, we can say that the change in genome is 1 per million in the human body. If we take this fact to be true. Now, right now we can say, okay, this is the change in the genome. How can evolution be possible? Because the change in the genome is so little.
And we can going back round and round. That's when I think it's not mutation only.
We can include the other factors, but in the end, it's a part of mutation, right? So they don't add any extra value.
Mutation is part of those factors. It's not they are part of mutation. Mutation being one of the factor for all those other factors which lead to evolution.
So, but if you see that, okay, like we can continue this tomorrow. I mean, in next class.
Thank God, Pratham.
Okay.
Love yourself by this. Okay, we will stop here and we'll continue this tomorrow. Yeah, we'll talk from this second. But I guess, yeah, these 2 points are very clear. He only, not only, what he wanted to speak of is this was not the normal homozygous plant. I'm still talking. Okay, let's talk in the next class tomorrow. Yeah. Bye. Thank you, people.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.